We need a new enlightenment. Like, this is the moment for that. That's something I truly believe. And as a matter of fact, I just renamed my channel The New Enlightenment with Ashley. So I would like to talk about how I'm thinking about this. What are the parallels between the Old Enlightenment and, say, the next 20 years as I see it playing out? And what do we need to think about? So here's where I'm going with this. First, I just want to give you a brief overview of the Old Enlightenment and what they did in that time period and how it relates. And then I want to answer the question, why do we need a new enlightenment right now? Like, what has happened with the system that necessitates that? And then what will the new enlightenment actually do? And what do we need to think about to be part of the new enlightenment? So first of all, what did the Old Enlightenment actually do? And I think there's three realms that matter, where one is the realm of governance, a second is the realm of economics, and I'm an economist, and then the third is the realm of the epistemic understanding. Like, epistemics, we need a better word for this. That's a really jargony word. But it basically means, how do we know what is true? So that was the scientific method, the advent of science from the Enlightenment period, that we got the epistemic realm. Those were the three realms. And one way that I'm starting to think about this is that the Enlightenment added all of these add-ons, all of these updates to democracy, where democracy was, of course, invented in ancient times. Like, if you look at Aristotle and Plato, they're all thinking about democracy and its weaknesses. And as a matter of fact, Socrates was killed by a mob through a democratic justice process. So they had some of these systems in place way before the Enlightenment. But the Enlightenment folks recognized that actually there are some human foibles that get in the way of a democratic system working out well. And I even think of it as tyranny of the mob, which is basically what killed Socrates. It was a mob killing through the system. And tyranny of the rulers, and that's a huge problem. And the Enlightenment thinkers had all of these add-ons, almost like an add-on to your browser. When you have an add-on to your Chrome browser, you're sort of adding this little update that actually really helps things. And the Enlightenment add-ons include things like due process and free speech and the representative democracy and freedom of the press and education for the entire population. These add-ons include human rights and checks and balances and the scientific method, all of these mechanisms for ensuring that the system protects against human foibles is sort of what the Enlightenment did. So to do that, they had to think carefully about human nature and the way human nature generally corrupts systems. And of course, we need to keep both the good and the bad in mind here, where human nature is power-seeking and vengeful and driven by emotion rather than reason, all of that. And yet, human beings are capable of reason in a way that other animals are not. Human beings are capable of love, they're capable of courage, they're capable of commitment to a community, self-sacrifice. They're capable of so many things that are really powerful tools. And so we just need systems to figure out, how do we protect against the foibles, and how do we bring out the most of human reason, human love, courage, all of that. That was the basic exercise of the Enlightenment thinkers. Or at least this is one way of thinking about how it worked. And then a different way of thinking about how it worked is that they came up with new institutions. And those new institutions were designed, once again, to improve the way human systems worked. And institutions is sometimes a word that's used differently in different places. But when I use that word, I mean it broadly. Like, institutions include markets and governments and things like marriage that essentially structure human relationships. Institutions create roles for humans and incentive structures to make human relationships and human systems work out more efficiently, more fairly. So that's what institutions are. And of course, these updates, these add-ons that the Enlightenment thinkers came up with, they were built into existing institutions, and in some cases, they came up with new institutions. And I think both of those will be at play moving forward, especially as we consider the digital space and how the digital space definitely impacts all kinds of institutions. It impacts human emotion, and it's speeding up the process. Oh, okay, so let me just get into the next piece here, which is, why is now the right moment for a new enlightenment? And I think a lot of the reasons have to do with technology, though not all of them. So, or at least there's non-technology elements to our problems we're facing right now. So the first of these, I think, is that technology is speeding up the pace at which things happen and things move. And part of the problem is that the updates that the old Enlightenment thinkers built into the system, sometimes those relied on slow processes, where we know that human emotion is fast, and logic and reason, those are actually kind of slow. You have to mull things over and look into different types of evidence, and the process of actually making things logical and fair and just, that is a slow process. So the fact that technology has increased the pace at which information flows, technology has increased the pace at which people form a strong opinion that's really hard to change, that's tied in with emotion. And that includes not just regular people, it includes leaders and academics and journalists, and it includes so many different people who are playing an important role in the system. Like, it includes judges and doctors, and it includes everybody who's playing any role of any importance in the system. They are subject to the same, in some ways, whims of the online information environment that everybody is. So in some cases, there may be some good things about this, like really good things about the fast pace of information flow. But it is a supercharged change from the past. And therefore, it is breaking down some of the systems that rely on that stickiness, that slowness to actually implement justice. Now, the second thing here is that the system, as it was set up by the Enlightenment thinkers and the founding fathers and all of that, that system wasn't perfect, but that system has depreciated. And depreciation of systems is a whole thing in and of itself. I will probably do another video just on that, like how do systems depreciate? But the key here is that when systems depreciate, what you start to see is people in power controlling the means of upward mobility. You start to see people on the bottom not being able to get their voices heard, either by the general public or maybe more importantly, by people in power. The voices just don't travel up that chain of power. You see more behavior that's a little bit tyrannical, behavior that's tyrannical from both the leaders, the people in leadership and powerful positions, and also from the mobs. And that gets to the third thing I think that's happening here. And this third one I think is connected to technology, which is if we think of those two types of tyrants, the ruler and the mob, there's something about technology that is creating an interesting relationship between those, where there are some levers of power such that people in power can control and influence the mob. So I do think in the Old Enlightenment, those two forces were completely separate and opposite. Maybe not completely, but to a large degree. Today, we're actually having to figure out, when is the mob separate from the sources of power, and when is the mob kind of enmeshed, or when is there an interesting marriage between the two? And of those three, the second one, I think, does not necessarily require technology, although technology will speed up the pace of depreciation of a system. So I think those are the three reasons we need this right now. So what will a new enlightenment actually do? And the most succinct way I can think of to say this is that a new enlightenment will sort of guide the building of new institutions and guide the add-ons to existing institutions that will update them according to the new digital world, where there's an interaction between the digital world and the face-to-face, in-person, community-based world. And I think we'll need both of those. I definitely don't think digital environments can lead to a functioning system in any way whatsoever if it's just by themselves. Like, I don't believe in the metaverse being, the universe of the future. We need in-person spaces, but those in-person communities and in-person institutions will be for sure interacting with digital tools. And how do we make sure that that interaction doesn't lead to the hijacking of institutions by forces of power that should not have a say, and money, for example? So that's the job of the New Enlightenment, is to think about how do we make in-person communities stronger? How do we make digital tools and digital environments serve the population in those three realms that I talked about at the beginning, in the three realms of governance, economics, and epistemic. Epistemic commons, which is how we know what is true. And of course, if we're thinking epistemic commons, we're really thinking about journalism and academia and science and all of that. And of these, there's a strong interconnection between those three realms. And I actually think probably the most prominent and most important part of this will be the epistemic realm, because how we discern truth, and that includes truth about facts, truth about people's views, truth about the way the system works, how we determine that will deeply, deeply influence both economics and governance. So for the people who want to be part of the New Enlightenment, what do they need to be thinking about? And for me, this is really what's guiding the topics I choose for my channel. It's these, I came up with 7 topics. I might come up with a different list a different day, but I'm trying to give you a sense for the range of topics. So the first one is systems thinking. Like, how do systems work when we're talking about governance systems, legal systems, education systems, all kinds of systems like that. And I think this does include systems that might be like marriage, or systems where it's more built into the layer of the culture rather than official in some kind of way. So I think systems thinking needs to apply to all kinds of institutions as we think about how to update them. And then the second piece here is the digital tools that we're going to use to update these systems. And so I do talk a lot on this channel about things related to Web 3.0 and online governance tools and blockchain and online identity. I think those are actually going to be the bottom layer, the ground upon which the New Enlightenment thinkers are going to build their new tools. So understanding what are the limitations of those tools, how can we wield those tools well, and how do they work? I think that's really important. And then the next piece here, of course, is the same piece the Enlightenment thinkers were thinking carefully about, which is human nature and how it interacts with systems. Because, of course, human nature is quirky. People are vengeful and spiteful and powerful and smart and all of these things, and loving and kind. So how do we wield human nature, given that the system is going to be built upon human souls? It's going to be built with people putting their heart and soul into trying to make everything work. So thinking about psychology is important. And I mean, I'm a behavioral economist, so I mean, this really relates to the kinds of stuff I teach and the kinds of stuff I think a lot about. So that's part of the story. So, and I realize it's kind of weird, I think, for people to see, okay, there's psychology-ish videos and Web 3.0 videos, and they're on the same channel. What's going on? And this is what's going on. This is the common thread through all of my videos. The next thing that I think is going to be super important to think through is the attention economy. Because I think attention is the scarce resource that the war of the New Enlightenment will be over. It will be over people's attention. And of course, that's how you manipulate people. That's how you give people certain perceptions or misperceptions about reality. Attention is what can fix the system. If you have people paying attention to ways of improving things. And I think one of the problems we're really facing is that everybody's attention is sort of all channeled on a few problems that they have no control over, rather than focusing their attention on their little part of the system that they could actually make better. So I do think if there is a war of this era, that war will be over the commodity of attention, just like past wars might have been over oil or iron or other resources that mattered for that day and age. The scarce resource today is human attention. And then the next piece of what I think the New Enlightenment thinkers need to consider is different methods for checks and balances on power. And this is checks and balances on power of the mobs and power of the rulers, because the original Enlightenment thinkers thought a lot about that. Like they were fully aware of tyranny of the majority, and they tried to build our system such that people didn't get squelched by even the majority opinion. So they implemented things like human rights and due process. So how do we embed human rights and due process in a world of information distortion? Like, that's a huge issue that we're going to need to think through. And then I think the New Enlightenment thinkers need to think carefully about information flow and how information moves and how information gets validated. So the information economy is something that I think is related to the attention economy, but it has its own properties. And we really need to understand what those properties are if we want the truth to reign, and if we want the truth to be one of the key inputs when we try to enact justice. And then the last piece here, I think, is just power dynamics and how that works within systems. Like, how does human power exert its will in ways that are just or unjust? And how do we wield that in this new digital economy? So that's just an overview of how I'm thinking about the New Enlightenment, how I'm thinking about the kinds of things I want to think through and talk about on this channel.